Hi everyone, Claudia here. This time I've got a small review for you. So I got this set of Winsor&Newton's designer gouache that was surprisingly hard to open. As you can see, I got the set with 10 tubes of 14 milliliters each. There's also a set that contains 6 tubes. Just giving you a quick look at the information sheet that's included in the set. So let's take a look at the individual colors. First up is primary yellow, which is a mix of the pigments PY74 and PY138. Next up is permanent yellow deep, PY65. Spectrum red consists of PBR25 and PR117. Primary red is a single pigment shade with PR117. Then onto the blues with primary blue PB15, so this is basically a phthalo blue in other brands. Ultramarine blue is PB29 as usual. Permanent green middle consists of PY3, PY74 and PG7. And now for the neutrals. Yellow ochre PY42, ivory black PBK9, and zinc white PW5. The pigment information is printed on the tube, as are other important informations like light fastness and opacity. I really want to get into gouache, and in fact I already have a few tubes from the Schminke Horadam line. And I also have this big academic gouache tube, which turned out to be an acrylic gouache because it dries down waterproof and therefore can't be mixed with watercolors to tone it unless you're really careful about keeping your paints clean, and that's kind of annoying. But back to the other paints. I have another ivory black, this time made from PBK1 and PBK9. It's also dried solid. Another zinc white, PW4, cadmium yellow light, PY35. The pigment information is a bit hard to find on these tubes. Carmine PV19, Prussian blue PB27, and to earth shades with raw umber PBR7, PY42, PBK11, and burnt sienna PBR7, PR101, and PBR33. Now for some swatches. The tone of the primary yellow falls somewhere in the middle, leaning neither warm or cool, while the permanent yellow deep is clearly warm-toned. Same as with the primary yellow, which is neither leaning warm or cool, the spectrum red does look like a true red to me. The primary red, on the other hand, is more of a hot pink than a red, but as with the primary blue, which is slightly greenish, it fits into the classic cyan magenta yellow color mode. The ultramarine blue is exactly what you expect from the name, a strong, slightly purple-leaning blue. I personally consider those blues cool instead of warm, but opinions differ and arguments can be made for both interpretations. Permanent green middle I would describe as a leaf green, probably really nice for landscapes. The yellow ochre is a light yellow earth tone. The ivory black is fairly neutral, maybe ever so slightly warm when thinned down. I have swatched my Schminke paints on the left just for reference. As you can see, there's a cooler and a warmer version of the yellows, reds and blues included. Although in my opinion the primary yellow leans neither warm nor cool. I would have expected more of a lemon yellow, for example. But still, having 2 variations of these colors allows for a greater range of mixes. And here's all of them together. I also swatched all my whites to see how they compare in terms of opacity, but I don't know how useful these swatches are. The Schminke Horadam white in the center looks most opaque in person, but that might be because the paint is already a bit drier. It's also warmer than the other 2. I find it interesting that all 3 use a different pigment. With all the swatching done, it's time to actually try these paints in a painting. I reread the already dried palette I used for swatching and added a bit of fresh paint. For some reason there was a bit of separation going on with the white, but that's nothing that can't be fixed by mixing up the paint with a skewer inside of the tube. The reference I used is a screenshot from the movie Rouroni Kenshin, The Beginning, as a sort of reminder to finally watch it. I've watched the first 2 movies when they came out a couple of years ago and somehow skipped the third. And yet, even with that gap, I watched the 4th movie, the final, and it was still enjoyable. By the way, The Beginning is actually the last movie, although it probably doesn't matter if you watch it first. I say without having watched it, because it takes place before the main story. I have also never read the manga or watched the anime, but I believe a friend of mine is a big fan of them. I don't know what she thinks of the live-action movies, although I believe they are generally well received by fans. Please don't ask me about any story details from the movies. All I remember is that Kenshin, our protagonist, used to kill a lot of people, had a crucial experience that led to him walking away from all that bloodshed, and there are still plenty of people after him seeking vengeance. And there's also some political turmoil going on. But the action scenes are great. Yes, I can do proper movie reviews, I promise. And maybe I really should have watched The Beginning before recording this voiceover. Maybe. As for the painting process, I think I haven't quite made the mental switch from watercolors to gouache. I'm not saying that using gouache like watercolors is wrong, you can do whatever you want with your paints. But if I wanted to paint with them like with watercolors, I would just use my watercolors, you know? So I need to try to not water down my paints too much so that they retain more of their opacity. Another thing I need to get used to is the drying shift. Of course, I knew that gouache dries down darker, but it's still different when you actually experience it. And so I made several areas way too dark in the beginning, like his clothes, but also his skin, which was completely off. I don't know why mixing the right shade with thicker paint is harder for me than with watery paint, but that's how it is, and I have to learn how to do it better. Maybe it's the fact that many mixes require white to be added in to achieve the right value. With watercolors, it doesn't matter all that much how deep the mass tone of your paint is. Just thin it out with enough water and you're still able to get a lighter value. Depending on your style, watercolors can look more free with their wet and wet technique, for example. But there's more planning involved because there's overall less room for error. And with gouache, or any other opaque painting medium, you can just fix things fairly easily, and that made me just go for it. That also meant that I went over some areas quite often, redoing them several times. But with a bit more practice, I will also improve my workflow. And so I just layered paint upon paint without getting all that much closer to the colors I saw in my reference. At one point I finally pulled the plug and just lifted most of the paints from the paper because I was getting nowhere and already tried to make it work for way too long. In theory, I could have tried to cover up the face with more paint, but classic gouache reactivates pretty easily with little water, and with all the layers already on the paper, that would have probably turned into a mess. Just removing some of the paint made everything so much better and gave me a blank slate to get the skin tones finally right. I really enjoyed working with square brushes here. The expressive brush strokes I could get with them worked really well for the hair. But I used them not just for the hair, but pretty much all over the painting except for the details. Let me talk a bit more about the paints now that I have used them. I don't know if I can make a full proper review on them because I don't have a good point of reference. Yes, I do own a couple of tubes from the Schminke line, but these are quite old. And as you saw, the black is dried solid and the Prussian blue is almost dried out. Some of these paints seem to still be fine, but I can't tell you if they've always been that way or if their texture did change over time. Therefore, the Winsor&Newton gouache is overall creamier in comparison, but it's not a fair comparison. I certainly enjoyed working with them, although I need to learn not to add too much water, because most of the time I ended up with thinner paint than I wanted or needed. What I find interesting is that there are primary colors included in the line. I don't think I have seen these in any artist-grade paints, no matter what kind of paint. The brands usually just pick colors from their line and tell you which are closest to the primary colors, but they aren't actually called that. My guess is that this has to do with the fact that this line is meant for designers and they need their colors to be consistent, with as little color variation as possible and accurately reproducible in print. I don't know if it's still something that's important. I can imagine that most designers work digitally nowadays, but I'm not an expert. Maybe there's still some designer work that's done traditionally on paper. The final thing to do was adding the blood splatters on his face. He also has some on his clothes, but I only noticed I forgot to add those after I finished filming. And of course he needs his scars. Okay. One of his scars. As I said, the movie is a prequel to the main story, so it obviously shows how Kenshin got them. And with that, I was apparently not done. I don't know why I felt the need to go over the background again. Looking at it now, I think it was perfectly fine, but past me had a different opinion. There's a bit of a learning curve, mainly because of the drying shift and also because paint that's already dried on the paper easily reactivates when you put more layers on top. I don't consider the latter a bad thing, it's simply a feature gouache has. And if you prefer your layers to stay put, maybe consider acrylic gouache, which is a cross between traditional gouache and acrylics. I hope you enjoyed this video and that I'll see you again. Bye!